The Galactic Dominion had ruled the stars for thousands of years. It was a vast empire made up of powerful alien species, each one stronger, faster, and more advanced than the humans of Earth. To the Dominion, humans were a young and reckless race, barely worthy of notice, until now. Humanity had proven itself in battle. Despite their smaller numbers and weaker technology, they had fought back against the Dominion's expansion. They were not the weak, fearful creatures the Dominion had expected. They were stubborn, relentless, and impossible to break. Every time the Dominion tried to crush them, the humans found a way to fight back. Now, after years of war, both sides had reached a deadlock. The Dominion could not defeat humanity without losing too much. Humanity could not win without suffering terrible losses. So, an unexpected solution was offered: a political marriage to form an alliance. The idea was shocking: a union between a human and a member of the Dominion's royal family. Unthinkable. Yet here they were. Inside the grand hall of the Dominion's capital, hundreds of alien nobles stood in silence. The walls were made of shimmering crystal, reflecting golden light. At the center of the room, sitting on a raised throne, was Crown Princess Vylera. She was tall, elegant, and had deep violet skin that shimmered under the glow of the palace lights. Her silver eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room. This was supposed to be a formal announcement, but it had turned into something far more dramatic. A human had been chosen to be her husband. And worse, he had accepted. Princess Vylera sat frozen, her mind struggling to process the situation. She had expected the human leader to reject such a ridiculous proposal. No human would agree to such a political trick. It was just a way to humiliate humanity, to make them submit without war. But the man standing before her was not afraid. Commander Ethan Graves stood tall, his dark uniform crisp, his posture firm. He was not a politician. He was a soldier, a warrior who had fought against the Dominion and survived. He had scars on his hands, signs of battles fought with determination. His gaze met Vylera's without hesitation. Then, in a voice filled with certainty, he said the words that stunned the entire court. "I accept the marriage." A wave of gasps spread through the crowd. The nobles whispered in shock. Even the Dominion's High Chancellor, an elder with golden scales, looked confused. No human should have agreed. No human should have had the courage to stand before the royal court like this. Vylera's fingers tightened on the armrest of her throne. She had always been taught that humans were weaker, that they would bend under pressure. But this man, he did not bend. She narrowed her eyes. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of disbelief in it. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yes, a marriage between our two people will stop this war. If that's what it takes to protect my people, then I'll do it." His words were direct, without fear. He was not here to beg. He was here because he had chosen this path. Vylera felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and something she could not name. She stood up, her long ceremonial robe flowing behind her. She took a step forward, looking down at the human. "Marriage is not just an alliance," she said coldly. "It is a bond, a commitment. You would be expected to follow our ways, our traditions. Do you truly believe you can live as one of us?" Ethan met her gaze. "No," he admitted. "I don't expect to be like you, but I don't have to be. I just need to be someone you can trust." The court fell silent. Vylera's heart pounded, though she did not show it. This human was not what she expected. He was not a coward. He was not afraid of her or her people, and that terrified her more than she was willing to admit. Suddenly, a noble stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming. "This is absurd," he shouted. "A human cannot be part of the royal family. This is a disgrace." Others joined in, their voices rising in protest. Vylera turned back to Ethan. His expression did not change. He did not flinch, even as powerful alien warriors shouted at him. She realized something then. This man was not here to submit. He was here to change everything. And for the first time in her life, Crown Princess Violet did not know what to do. The announcement of the marriage had sent shockwaves through the galactic dominion. For centuries, the royal bloodline had been pure, unbroken by outsiders. And now, a human had been accepted as the future consort of Crown Princess Valeria. To the Dominion's noble class, this was a disgrace. To the military leaders, it was a weakness. To Valeria herself, it was a mistake. She sat alone in her private chambers, staring at the ornate walls of her palace. Outside, the city of Velmera shone with its towering spires and glowing bridges, a symbol of the Dominion's power. Yet despite all this grandeur, she felt trapped. Her mind replayed the moment over and over again. Ethan Graves standing before the court, accepting the marriage with no hesitation. No human should have agreed so easily. He had to be planning something. A soft chime rang through her room. Her personal assistant, an eye-infused orb, floated into view. "Your Highness, Commander Graves has arrived. He is waiting in the Hall of Stars for your audience." Valeria sighed, rubbing her temples. She did not want to see him. But delaying this meeting would only make things worse. Send him in. A moment later, the doors slid open with a gentle hum, and Ethan Graves stepped inside. He was still in his military uniform, the dark fabric contrasting with the bright golden glow of the room. His posture was straight, disciplined, but his expression was calm. He showed no fear, no hesitation, just the same quiet confidence that had unsettled her in the throne room. Valeria stood, her long silver robes flowing behind her as she walked toward him. "Do you even understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I've accepted a political agreement, one that prevents war." Valeria narrowed her eyes. "You accepted a marriage, Commander. Do humans take such things lightly?" Ethan didn't react to her cold tone. "Not at all. That's why I accepted it." Valeria clenched her jaw. She had expected him to back down, to show some hesitation, but he was unshaken. She took a step closer, her silver eyes meeting his. "You must know what they are saying. The nobles believe you are a disgrace. The military sees you as a threat. Do you think I wanted this? I do not. This is nothing more than a forced arrangement." Ethan gave a small nod. "I know, and yet here we are." Valeria inhaled sharply. His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable truth. There was no turning back now. She crossed her arms. "Very well. If you wish to be part of the Dominion, you will follow our customs. That includes proving yourself worthy." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I expected as much. What do I have to do?" Valeria smirked. "A trial of honor." The trial of honor. The next morning, the entire court gathered in the grand arena, a massive circular structure where warriors of the Dominion trained and proved their strength. The sky above was dark with storm clouds, but the arena was bright, filled with the hum of energy fields and the murmurs of nobles eager to see the human fail. Ethan stood in the center, his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. He had no armor, no weapons, just his own skills. Across from him, 3 elite Dominion warriors stood ready. They were twice his size, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Their sharp, reptilian eyes watched him with amusement. High above, Valeria sat on the royal platform, observing. She had no doubt this was a test he would lose. The High Chancellor stood and raised a hand. "The trial of honor shall now begin. The human must prove his worth by lasting 3 minutes in battle against our finest warriors." The nobles laughed. 3 minutes was impossible. No human could match a Dominion fighter, let alone 3. The signal was given. The first warrior lunged at Ethan, his massive fist swinging toward him. The crowd held their breath, and then gasped as Ethan sidestepped, grabbing the warrior's arm and twisting it. The alien grunted in pain as Ethan used his own weight against him, sending him crashing to the ground. The second warrior attacked, his blade cutting through the air. Ethan ducked, rolled, and landed a precise strike to the warrior's ribs, forcing him back. The nobles murmured in shock. Humans were supposed to be slower, weaker, yet this one moved like a trained predator. The third warrior came at him, aiming to grab him in a crushing hold. Ethan let him get close, then suddenly slammed his elbow into the alien's throat. The warrior stumbled, gasping for air. Time was running out. Ethan kept moving, dodging blows, countering attacks, refusing to fall. 3 minutes passed. The chime rang, signaling the end of the trial. The arena was silent. Ethan stood unbroken, while the 3 warriors struggled to get up. He turned, breathing hard, and looked directly at Valera. The princess's heart skipped a beat. She had wanted him to fail. She had expected him to fail. Instead, he had shown something no Dominion noble could deny: strength, skill, and resilience. The High Chancellor slowly stood. The human has passed the trial of honor. The nobles exploded in outrage. Valera, however, remained silent. She watched Ethan, her mind racing. Perhaps she had misjudged him. Perhaps this human was not as weak as she had believed. The trial of honor had changed everything. Ethan Graves had done the impossible. He had stood against 3 elite warriors of the Dominion and survived. More than that, he had won their respect. But respect was not enough to silence the voices of those who hated the idea of a human consort. The Dominion's nobles were furious. The military leaders were restless. And among them, in the shadows of the palace, there were those who would rather see him dead than accept a future where a human stood beside their princess. Ethan knew this. He could feel the tension in every hall of the palace, in the cold stares of the guards, in the whispers that followed him. This was not over. And soon, the real danger would begin. A warning in the dark. Ethan stood on the balcony of his assigned quarters, staring out at the vast alien city below. The spires of Velmera gleamed under the twin moons, their golden lights stretching into the night. It was a breathtaking sight. Beautiful, but dangerous. He was deep in enemy territory. Footsteps sounded behind him. He turned to see Valera, her silver robes flowing like liquid light. She was watching him with that same unreadable expression she always had. "You're being watched," she said quietly. Ethan smirked. "That obvious, huh?" Her silver eyes narrowed. "You are a human standing in the heart of the Dominion, claiming a place no outsider has ever held. There are those who see you as a threat. Some will try to remove you." Ethan folded his arms. "You included?" Valera hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she sighed. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have survived the trial." Ethan chuckled. "Fair point." Valera stepped closer. "You should be careful, Commander. This palace is not as safe as it seems." Ethan nodded. He had spent years on battlefields, surviving against impossible odds. He knew the feeling of being hunted, and he was feeling it now. The assassination attempt. It happened that very night. Ethan was walking through the palace corridors when he heard the faintest sound, the whisper of movement where there should have been none. His instincts kicked in, honed by years of war. Without thinking, he ducked just in time. A blade slashed through the air, missing his throat by inches. Ethan spun around, grabbing the attacker's wrist. The assassin, a Dominion warrior dressed in dark armor, hissed in frustration and lashed out with his free hand. Ethan blocked the strike, twisting the attacker's arm and slamming him into the wall. The assassin was fast, faster than any human, but Ethan was smarter. The warrior recovered quickly, pulling the hidden dagger. But before he could strike, a blast of energy tore through the hall, hitting the assassin square in the chest. The attacker collapsed, unmoving. Ethan turned. Valera stood at the end of the corridor, her pulse weapon still glowing in her hand. Her eyes were cold. Ethan exhaled. "I had that under control." Valera raised an eyebrow. "Of course. That's why he had a knife at your throat." Ethan glanced down at the fallen assassin, then back at her. "I guess I owe you one." She holstered her weapon. You owe me nothing, but you do owe yourself an answer. Who sent him? Ethan crouched down and pulled a small insignia from the assassin's armor. It was the symbol of the High Council's elite guards. Velera's expression darkened. Someone powerful wants you dead. Ethan stood, gripping the insignia. Then I guess we have work to do. The aftermath. The next morning, the palace was in chaos. The news of the assassination attempt had spread quickly. The nobles were divided. Some whispered that Ethan had staged it for attention, while others were shocked that an attack had happened inside the palace itself. The High Chancellor stood before the royal court, his golden eyes serious. This attack is an insult to the Dominion. Our own halls have been defiled by treachery. The guilty must be found. Velera stepped forward, her voice calm but dangerous. And they will be. Ethan stood beside her, holding up the insignia. I believe this belongs to someone in this room. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Someone among them had ordered his death. And now, they knew he wasn't going down without a fight. The palace remained on high alert after the assassination attempt. Guards patrolled every corridor, scanning for threats, while nobles whispered in hushed voices. The news had spread across the Dominion. Someone within the royal court wanted Commander Ethan Graves dead. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He had faced worse dangers on the battlefield. And now he was playing a different kind of war, one that required patience, intelligence, and an understanding of his enemies. But he was not alone. For the first time, Crown Princess Velera found herself standing beside him, not as a rival, but as an uneasy ally. The hidden enemy. Ethan and Velera stood inside the palace war room, a massive chamber filled with holographic displays of the Dominion's political structure. The image of the insignia he had taken from the assassin floated in the air, rotating slowly. It belongs to the High Council's elite guards, Velera said, her voice sharp. Only a few members of the nobility have the power to command them. Ethan folded his arms. Then we need to find out which one gave the order. Velera sighed. That will not be easy. The council is filled with ambitious leaders. Many of them hate the idea of a human joining the royal family. They see you as a threat to tradition. Ethan smirked. They're not wrong. Velera shot him a glare, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. We have to move carefully, she continued. If we accuse the wrong person, it will spark a political disaster. Ethan nodded. He had fought wars before, but this was different. This was a game of shadows, where words and alliances mattered more than weapons. We need a name, he said, and I know how to get it. The informant. That night, Ethan met a contact in the lower levels of the city. Unlike the royal palace, where everything was clean and shining, these streets were darker, filled with merchants, mercenaries, and spies. The contact was a Dominion noble who had fallen from grace, a former politician who had been cast out of the council. He owed no loyalty to the ruling elite, which made him the perfect person to bribe for information. Ethan sat across from him in a dimly lit room. I need a name. The informant hesitated. You're asking for dangerous knowledge, human. Ethan placed a small data chip on the table. Then let's make it worth your while. The informant stared at it for a long moment before finally leaning in. His voice was barely above a whisper. The order to kill you came from Lord Salfor. Ethan's expression didn't change, but inside, his mind was racing. Salfor was one of the most powerful members of the High Council, a noble who had always opposed the idea of peace with humanity. It made sense. Ethan stood up. You've been helpful. The informant nodded quickly. Be careful, Commander. Salfor is not a man to be underestimated. Ethan smirked. Neither am I. The confrontation. Back at the palace, Ethan told Velera everything. She was silent for a long moment, her silver eyes focused on the holographic map in front of her. Salfor, she murmured. I should have known. Ethan raised an eyebrow. He's got influence, doesn't he? Velera nodded. More than that. He commands half of the military fleet. If we accuse him publicly, he could start a civil war. Ethan leaned against the table. Then we don't go after him openly. We set a trap. Villera looked at him, intrigued. What kind of trap? Ethan's lips curled into a grin. We make him think he's already won. Setting the trap. The next evening, a grand banquet was held at the palace. Nobles and military leaders gathered, dressed in their finest robes, their faces masks of politeness. Ethan was there too, standing beside Villera, as if nothing had happened. But he knew Zalthor was watching. The plan was simple: pretend to be vulnerable and let Zalthor make a mistake. As the feast continued, Villera raised her glass. Tonight, we celebrate unity between our people. There were polite claps, but Ethan could feel the tension in the air. He glanced toward Zalthor, a tall, imposing figure with dark blue scales. His sharp eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at Ethan. Then it happened. A servant moved toward Ethan with a drink. But as soon as Ethan reached for it, Villera grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Her silver eyes locked onto the servant. You. Drink it. The servant froze. The room fell silent. Ethan immediately understood. It was poisoned. The servant tried to run, but the guards seized him. He struggled, but then a single energy blast struck him from across the room, killing him instantly. The nobles gasped, turning toward the source of the shot. It was Zalthor. He had fired his weapon without thinking, trying to silence the servant before he could talk. A deadly mistake. Villera stood, her expression calm but dangerous. Lord Zalthor, she said, her voice echoing across the hall. Do you have something to confess? Zalthor's face twisted with fury. He realized his error. He had revealed himself before the entire court. The guards surrounded him, weapons raised. Ethan smirked. Checkmate. Zalthor snarled, but he had no escape. He had lost. Villera stepped forward. You have plotted against the royal family and against the peace of this empire. For that, I sentence you to exile. The nobles whispered in shock, but none protested. Zalthor had sealed his own fate. As the guards dragged him away, Ethan looked at Villera. I didn't think you'd actually save me back there. Villera smirked. You're not as unbearable as I first thought, Commander. Ethan chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. For the first time, Villera felt something strange. Not annoyance, not duty, but something deeper. Maybe this alliance wasn't so bad after all. Zalthor was gone, exiled from the Dominion after his failed assassination attempt on Ethan. The court was still in shock, but no one dared to question Crown Princess Villera's decision. She had proven herself as a leader, and Ethan had proven himself as someone who could not be taken down so easily. But Ethan knew the danger wasn't over. Zalthor might be gone, but his influence remained. His allies in the Dominion military and the High Council would not forget this defeat. Something bigger was coming, and Ethan had a feeling that the real enemy was still in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. A sudden disappearance. The next morning, Villera summoned Ethan to the Royal Strategy Chamber. She looked troubled. One of our most important fleet commanders, Admiral Rethar, has disappeared, she said. Ethan frowned. Disappeared. Villera nodded. He was last seen boarding his personal ship last night. The ship never reached its destination, and all communication was lost. Ethan's instincts told him this was no accident. You think someone took him? Villera's expression hardened. I think Zalthor's allies are moving against us. Rethar was one of the few commanders who supported peace with humanity. If they've taken him, they're sending us a message. Ethan exhaled. And I'm guessing we can't ignore it. No, Villera said. We have to get him back before they use him against us. Ethan smirked. I was hoping for some action. Villera rolled her eyes. Then prepare yourself, human, because this mission will be dangerous. Tracking the enemy. With Villera's help, Ethan studied the last known coordinates of Admiral Rethar's ship. The Dominion's intelligence reports suggested pirate activity in that region of space. But Ethan didn't buy it. "This isn't pirates," he said. "This is an inside job. Someone within the military is working with Sci-Fi's supporters." Valera's gaze darkened. "Then we must act fast." She turned to her personal guards. "Prepare a stealth cruiser. We leave immediately." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "We?" Valera smirked. "You didn't think I'd let you go alone, did you?" Ethan chuckled. "I was hoping for a quiet rescue mission. But I guess having a princess along makes it more interesting." Valera crossed her arms. "Just try to keep up, Commander." The rescue mission. The Dominion's stealth cruiser slipped through space, hidden from enemy sensors. Ethan and Valera sat in the command deck, watching the holographic display of their destination. A large abandoned space station floated near a gas giant, its metal hull covered in scars from old battles. "That's where they're holding Rethar," Valera said. Ethan studied the station. "Looks quiet. Too quiet." Valera nodded. "It's a trap." Ethan grinned. "Good. Let's spring it." Infiltration. Ethan and Valera landed inside the station with a small team of elite Dominion warriors. The air was stale, the lights flickering. It was clear the station had been abandoned for years, until now. They moved carefully through the halls, weapons ready. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the speakers. "Ah, the princess and the human. You walked right into our hands." Ethan recognized that voice. Commander Vorkin, one of Zalthor's most loyal supporters. Valera's expression was ice cold. "Where is Admiral Rethar?" Vorkin chuckled. "Alive for now. But if you want him, you'll have to fight for him." Ethan rolled his shoulders. "I was hoping you'd say that." The lights went out, and alarms blared. From the shadows, heavily armed soldiers appeared, weapons raised. The trap had been set, but Ethan and Valera were ready. "Move," Valera shouted. Ethan and the team dove for cover as the enemy opened fire. The station erupted into chaos as plasma blasts lit up the darkness. Ethan took down 2 enemies with precise shots, while Valera moved like a ghost, slicing through the attackers with her energy blade. "Rethar is in the control room," Valera called out. Ethan nodded. "Then let's finish this." The final confrontation. They fought their way through the station, taking down enemy soldiers one by one. Finally, they reached the control room. Inside, Admiral Rethar was tied to a chair, looking bruised but alive. And standing beside him was Commander Vorkin, holding a blaster to his head. "Not another step," Vorkin warned. Ethan didn't stop. He kept walking forward, slowly. "You already lost, Vorkin. Your men are down. You have nowhere to run." Vorkin's hand shook slightly, but he kept his blaster pressed against Rethar's temple. "I can still kill him." Ethan's eyes locked onto them. "You won't." Vorkin sneered. "You think I won't?" Ethan smirked. "I think if you wanted him dead, you would have killed him already. But you need him alive. You need leverage. And that means you're out of options." Vorkin hesitated. That was all Ethan needed. In a single motion, he drew his pistol and fired. The blast struck Vorkin's hand, making him drop his weapon. Valera moved in instantly, knocking him to the ground and holding her blade to his throat. "It's over," she said. Vorkin snarled, but knew he was beaten. Ethan untied Admiral Rethar. "You okay?" Rethar coughed but nodded. "Took them long enough to find me." Ethan chuckled. "Better late than never." Valera signaled to her team. "Take Vorkin into custody. He will answer for his crimes." As they left the station, Ethan looked at Valera. "We make a good team." Valera smirked. "Try not to let it go to your head, human." Ethan grinned. "No promises." As they boarded the stealth cruiser and left the station behind, Ethan knew one thing for certain. The war for the future of the Dominion was far from over. The rescue mission was a success. Admiral Rethar was safe, and Commander Vorkin was now a prisoner, his betrayal exposed. But Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Zalthor's supporters were still out there, waiting for their chance, and they wouldn't stay quiet for long. A dangerous interrogation. Back at the palace, Vorkon was locked inside a high-security prison. He was one of the last high-ranking traitors still standing, and Ethan knew he had valuable information. Ethan and Villera entered the interrogation chamber. Vorkon sat in chains, his face bruised but defiant. "You made a mistake coming here, human," he sneered. Ethan crossed his arms. "I don't make mistakes. You, on the other hand, are in a pretty bad spot." Vorkon smirked. "You think you've won." Villera stepped forward. "We have you in custody, Vorkon. Zalthor is gone. Your rebellion is over." Vorkon laughed. "You really think so? You have no idea what's coming." Ethan leaned in. "Then why don't you tell us?" Vorkon's smile didn't fade. "Because soon it won't matter." Before Ethan or Villera could react, Vorkon bit down on something hidden in his mouth. A second later, he collapsed. Ethan cursed. Poison. The guards rushed in, but it was too late. Vorkon was dead. Villera clenched her fists. He chose death over capture. That means the others are still out there. Ethan exhaled. And whatever they're planning is already in motion. The hidden message. Ethan and Villera returned to the palace war room. Admiral Rethar was already there, looking concerned. "I analyzed Vorkon's personal data files," Rethar said. "Before he was captured, he sent a hidden transmission to an unknown location." Ethan frowned. "What kind of transmission?" Rethar activated a holographic screen. The message was short but chilling. "The final phase begins. The weapon is ready." Villera's eyes widened. "Weapon?" Ethan's gut told him this was bad. Very bad. "We need to find out where that transmission was sent," he said. Rethar nodded. "I already traced it. The signal was directed to an old Dominion outpost, one that was supposed to be abandoned." Ethan looked at Villera. "Looks like we've got another mission." Villera's expression was serious. "We leave immediately." The enemy's base, Ethan, Villera, and a team of elite Dominion warriors arrived at the old outpost. The structure was massive, built into the side of an asteroid. The lights were on. The station was active. "This place was supposed to be empty," Villera said. Ethan loaded his weapon. "Looks like the enemy had other plans." They moved in quietly, making their way through the dark corridors. The deeper they went, the more signs they saw of something big happening here. Weapons crates, engineering tools, and massive fuel tanks. Then they found it. A massive warship sat inside the hangar, unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its dark hull was covered in strange markings, and its weapons looked far more advanced than standard Dominion technology. Villera's face paled. "That's impossible." Ethan looked at her. "You recognize this?" Villera nodded slowly. "This isn't just any ship. It's a Doombringer-class battleship, a prototype from the Dominion's secret military projects. It was supposed to be destroyed years ago." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Well, someone rebuilt it. And judging by those weapons, it's more powerful than ever." Then the alarms blared. A voice echoed through the station speakers. "Well, well, look who finally arrived." Ethan and Villera recognized the voice immediately. Zalthor. He was alive. And he was already one step ahead. The trap. Doors slammed shut around them. Red lights flashed as security turrets activated, pointing directly at the team. Zalthor's voice was filled with amusement. "You really thought I was finished?" "No, my dear princess. I've been preparing for this moment." Ethan cursed. "We walked right into this." Villera gritted her teeth. "Zalthor, face me yourself, coward." Zalthor chuckled. "Oh, you'll see me soon enough. But first, let me show you what true power looks like." Outside the hangar, the Doombringer battleship began to power up. Its massive engines hummed, and its weapons came online. Ethan's heart pounded. They're launching it. Villera's voice was urgent. We have to stop it before it reaches Dominion space. Ethan looked around. Then we need to blow this place up. Villera's eyes met his. Agreed. She turned to her team. Plant explosives on the main reactor. We destroy this station before that ship escapes. Zalthor laughed through the speakers. You think I'll let you? Suddenly, hundreds of enemy soldiers swarmed into the hangar, weapons raised. Ethan smirked. I was hoping for a good fight. Villera ignited her energy blade. Then let's give them one. The battle exploded into chaos. Blaster fire filled the air as Ethan and Villera fought side by side, cutting through enemy forces. Dominion warriors planted explosives on the reactor as the countdown began. Through the chaos, Ethan saw Zalthor standing on the bridge of the battleship, watching them with a victorious smirk. Then the ship began to rise. The engines roared to life, and the battleship started moving toward open space. Villera's eyes widened. We won't make it in time. Ethan gritted his teeth. Then we go after it. The station was collapsing, but Ethan wasn't backing down. As the battleship launched, he grabbed Villera's arm and pointed toward a nearby shuttle. We're not letting him get away, he said. Villera hesitated, then nodded. Together, they ran toward the shuttle as the station erupted in flames behind them. Their mission wasn't over. They were taking the fight to Zalthor himself. The station was falling apart, explosions tearing through its structure. Ethan and Villera sprinted through the wreckage, heading toward a small shuttle docked in the hangar. Behind them, the Doombringer battleship was rising, its massive engines burning bright as it prepared to leave the asteroid base. We need to move now, Ethan shouted. Villera nodded, gripping her energy blade. Then let's finish this. They jumped into the shuttle, and Ethan quickly took control, launching the small craft into space. The moment they cleared the hangar, the station behind them erupted into flames, breaking apart into debris. But the real battle was just beginning. Chasing the Doombringer. The battleship was already moving at full speed, heading straight for Dominion space. If it reached the capital, the damage would be unimaginable. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. We can't let them get away. Villera activated the ship's weapons. Then we take them down. Ethan pushed the engines to their limit, speeding toward the battleship. Inside the massive warship, Zalthor watched them from the command bridge, his expression calm. They're persistent, he said, but they're too late. One of his officers turned to him. Shall we fire on them, my lord? Zalthor smirked. No, let them come. They want a fight. Then we'll give them one. Breaking in, Ethan piloted the shuttle through the defense fire, dodging the battleship's massive plasma cannons. Hold on, he shouted as he steered toward a weak point in the ship's hull, an exposed hangar bay. Villera braced herself. Are you seriously planning to crash into it? Ethan grinned. It's not crashing if we survive. The shuttle slammed into the hangar, skidding across the metal floor before coming to a stop. Alarms blared as enemy soldiers rushed toward them. Ethan grabbed his weapon. Let's go. Villera ignited her blade. We stop this ship or die trying. Together, they charged into battle, fighting through the enemy. Enemy forces swarmed the hangar, but Ethan and Villera fought with everything they had. Blaster fire filled the air. Ethan moved fast, taking down enemies with precise shots. Villera was a blur, her energy blade cutting through enemy ranks like a storm. We need to get to the bridge, Ethan shouted. Villera pointed to a lift. This way. They fought their way through the corridors, every step bringing them closer to Zalthor. But time was running out. The ship was already approaching Dominion space. If they didn't stop it now, millions would die. The final confrontation. The doors to the bridge slammed open, and Ethan and Villera stepped inside, weapons ready. Zalthor stood at the center, waiting for them. You're too late, he said calmly. The ship is already locked onto its target. Villera's eyes burned with fury. I won't let you do this. Zalthor smirked. Then stop me. He drew his own blade, a dark weapon pulsing with energy. Ethan raised his gun, but before he could fire, Zalthor moved with impossible speed, slashing at him. Ethan barely dodged in time. He's fast. Villera lunged forward, clashing blades with Zalthor. The two warriors moved like lightning, their weapons sparking against each other as they dueled. Ethan fired at Zalthor, forcing him to step back. We're ending this, right now. Zalthor sneered. You think you can defeat me? Villera's grip tightened on her blade. I know we can. Victory or death. The fight was brutal. Zalthor was powerful, but Ethan and Villera fought together, covering each other's attacks. Finally, Villera saw an opening. She dodged Zalthor's strike, and with one swift move, drove her blade through his chest. Zalthor's eyes widened in shock. You will never win, he whispered before collapsing. Silence filled the bridge. Then Ethan turned to the control panel. The ship is still locked on target. Villera rushed to the console. We need to disable it. Ethan looked at the control system. It was too complex. There's only one way, Villera said. We have to overload the core. Ethan nodded. Then let's do it. The escape. They worked quickly, setting the ship's reactor to overload. Alarms blared as the battleship shook violently. We have 2 minutes before this thing blows, Villera shouted. Ethan grabbed her hand. Then let's get out of here. They ran through the crumbling corridors, reaching an emergency pod just as explosions rocked the ship. Ethan slammed the launch button, and the pod shot into space, racing away from the doomed battleship. A moment later, boom! The Doombringer battleship erupted into a massive explosion, its wreckage scattering across space. Ethan and Villera watched from the pod, breathing heavily. It's over, Villera whispered. Ethan grinned. We did it. A new beginning. Hours later, they landed safely back on Dominion territory. The war was finally over. Villera stood before the High Council, declaring the end of the rebellion and the beginning of a new era, one where the Dominion and humanity could work together. Ethan stood beside her, knowing that this was only the beginning of something greater. Villera looked at him and smiled. I suppose I should thank you, human. Ethan smirked. You could start by calling me Ethan. Villera chuckled. Very well, Ethan. As the stars shone above them, Ethan knew one thing for sure. The future was theirs to build, together.